You know what it is, don't you?
I'm sorry, having a little trouble keeping up. What?
The monster. You know what it is. Or should I say who?
Amahl Farouk, the Shadow King. We have to rescue them.
The Shadow King is one of the oldest and most powerful supervillains in comic book history. He's battled Professor X and the X-Men for decades, and this April, he's back to torment David Haller in the highly anticipated second season of Legion. Hey guys, I'm Ryan, and we're huge fans of the show here at GameSpot Universe, so much so that we're prepping you for Season 2 with a little history lesson. Not real history, of course, comic book history. Today's topic, who is the Shadow King? Where did he come from? What makes him so powerful? And why the hell is he so obsessed with poor David? Before we hit the comic books, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We'll be breaking down each and every episode of Legion Season 2 starting the first week of April. Also, for the latest movie and TV trailers, check out our new GameSpot Universe Trailers channel. Now, because comic books have no rules, the Shadow King's origins are a little unclear, but there are a couple lines of thinking. One, the Shadow King was actually born, quote, when the first dreams came in night in the first nightmare, which I imagine looked something like this. In other books, the Shadow King was never a physical being, but an evil psychic entity existing exclusively on the astral plane. He hijacked human hosts since the beginning of time. The Shadow King made his Marvel Comics debut as Amahl Farouk in 1979's Uncanny X-Men number 117. Farouk's backstory is extremely wild. Back in the 1930s, he worked for two of Hitler's special agents set to dethrone King Edward of England. And by the time the 1970s rolled around, he was a big-time crime lord in Cairo, Egypt. And that's when Professor X came into play. Charles Xavier was vacationing in Cairo when a small child under the Shadow King's control pickpocketed him. By the way, that child would grow up to become Storm. During the chase, Xavier was struck by a psychic bolt of energy. He then came face to face with the entity that would become his bitter enemy for decades. Now, Farouk tried his absolute best to persuade Xavier to join him, but Charles wasn't having it. They battled on the astral plane where Xavier defeated the Shadow King. While the encounter with Professor X might have been a fatal blow to Amahl Farouk, the Shadow King survived on the astral plane and planned his next attack. Something big to note here, Farouk was the first evil mutant that Xavier had come in contact with, and it ultimately factored into his founding of the X-Men. Now, this might remind you of what we saw in Season 1 of Legion. Think back to that awesome chalkboard sequence when David learns that his father has powers and fought the same monster that has haunted him his entire life.
My father, he must have won. And the monster or whatever, somehow his mind or his soul or his being, whatever, it didn't die.
As it pertains to the TV show, the Shadow King sought revenge on Xavier and targeted his own son, David. The good news for Season 2 is we're finally gonna get to see Amahl Farouk. I won't get into those details just yet, but we're gonna dive into everything we know about Legion Season 2 next week here on GameSpot Universe, so make sure you're subscribed. At this point, you're well aware that the Shadow King is one of the most powerful telepaths ever. Yes, possibly even as powerful as Professor X. What makes him such a formidable opponent and virtually immortal is that even if the physical body that he's inhabiting is killed, he can move to the astral plane. His powers are even greater here as he can use mental energy bolts, probes, and can manipulate the astral plane to his desire.
The hospital wasn't real.
No shit.
Well, to be accurate, there is a real hospital, but we weren't there.
It was a mental projection created by the monster. I've been paying attention.
His energy and strength feeds off one's fears, their dark thoughts, and hatred of humanity. And his greatest power is being able to control other humans and mutants while he's on the astral plane. As expected, he's even harder to defeat when he has control over powerful psychics such as Legion. On the astral plane, he can only be stopped by using telepathy or certain types of magic. Basically, he can live for decades and decades and beyond the death of any physical body he inhabits. Now, if there's one storyline from the comics that you should brush up on before season 2 starts, I would recommend the Muir Island saga. That will give you a pretty good idea of the type of villain that David and company is dealing with. Specifically, I would check out the 3-issue arc of the Uncanny X-Men number 278 through 280. This featured the big return of the Shadow King as he seeked revenge against Xavier, and what's better than using his own son against him? This time around, the Shadow King had inhabited the body of Jacob Reitz, a deceased FBI agent. He then took total control over everyone on Muir Island, forcing all of the X-Men, new and old, to team up together. Luckily, Mystique was able to kill his physical form, but the Shadow King just moved to a new host, Legion. That was not good. By hijacking Legion's powers, the Shadow King destroyed much of the island and easily fought off the invaders. Once again, Professor X battled the Shadow King on the astral plane, and with the help of the X-Men put an end to his control over Muir Island. The Shadow King wasn't gone for long. That would be too easy. But he was weakened and forced to retreat to the astral plane. Legion was left in a catatonic state and would remain that way until Legion Quest. Xavier again lost the use of his legs after the Shadow King broke his spine and legs in the battle. The good news is, though, the original X-Men rejoined the group under Professor X, and the rest is history. Obviously, there are a ton of other Shadow King storylines that you can read up on, like the time he inhabited Karma, and ate so much that the New Mutant looked like this. Or the 2-part Psy-War, when he battled with Psylocke and actually was trapped inside her mind at one point. Back to the TV show, if you thought the Shadow King, aka Amahl Farouk, was a menacing villain last season, well, you're in for quite a surprise come season 2. Remember, he's been waiting for years to get revenge on Professor X while haunting his son and worsening his mental state. Now that he's seemingly free and stronger than ever, things are not looking good for the good guys. Thanks for watching, guys. What are your predictions for the Shadow King in season 2 of Legion? Let me know in the comments below, and also make sure you're subscribed because we're gonna have weekly videos on Legion throughout the season. We'll see you next time.